except that they forget that once certain people come to power, then you're one of the first that they destroy, because you see, they have to stop you because you helped them get here. That means you have power, and power goes after power. And there's nothing like when the government comes against you. So we have to begin to see that there are seeds being planted, seeds of unrest, seeds of distrust, seeds of divisiveness. And there are people who want power, and they're going to get it if we allow them to be successful. And that's why people who look like me are dangerous, because I'm the trifecta. I'm an immigrant. Supposedly conservative hates immigrants. I'm a woman. Supposedly conservatives are misogynists and whatever else. I am also Black. Supposedly conservatives hate Blacks. So I'm all three. And that's why they have to come against me and call me a white supremacist, even though I'm pretty much dark chocolate in color. And it's nonsense. Of course, you see, you're laughing because I told you none of it makes any sense. But Glenn, here's the thing. I'm the one who wants Black women to have their babies. How can I be a white supremacist? It's dumb. It's dumb what they say. But you know, there are enough people who look like me who are not listening anymore. They're understanding what this is all about. This is about power. It's always been about power.
Let me,
you know, the NAACP.
Go ahead.
I'm going to say this last thing. NAACP invited our Secretary of the Commonwealth to dinner. And it's one of the ways that they raise money, scholarship money, so that people can afford schools, etc. And because she's a Republican, the Democrats came after this local NAACP chapter and forced the local NAACP chapter, a nonpartisan organization, to pretty much disinvite her. And because they wouldn't, then they had to cancel something that would help the Black community. Imagine that, education. So what we're discovering now is that we actually have a master. Black people have a master, and it's the Democrat Party who has become our new masters. Who died and left you in charge of us? And who died and left you in charge by putting certain Black people in charge of us? Are you our new overseers? Is that how this works? Well, we're not listening anymore.
You know, it's funny. I'll get into this with you some other time, but you say who died and left you in charge of us. I think it was John F. Kennedy, and he left Lyndon Johnson, a known racist, also the guy who signed the Great Society Bill, which just destroyed the Black community, as you point out. So,
on the heels of what Winsome just said about Blacks becoming slaves, see links in the video description. Democrats, of course, they've taken Black people for granted for a long time, and they want them to remain poor, just like Winsome said. See links in the video description. From 2008 to 2020, we're going to continue beating this drum. From 2008 to 2020, Black men were 43.866% of all expanded homicide data victims. Remember, Black men are roughly 6.6% of the entire population, and they are typically 44% of all homicide victims. That's where the FBI had data on expanded homicide data. That doesn't cover all homicide victims, but for a lot of them, they have that expanded data. It's a pretty good sample size. From 2008 to 2019, Blacks averaged 37.99% of arrestees for violent crime. And in that same link you read below, you can see Asians are hardly ever arrested for violent crime and homicide, just a lot below their percentage of the population. Why are Asians behaving so well and Blacks not? Especially young Black men. If we assume, and not gratuitously, that Black men are 75% of the Black arrestees for violent crime, because men are typically 75% of the arrestees for violent crime and 80% of the arrestees for homicide. If we assume that Black men are 75% of the Black arrestees for violent crime, then that means of all the black persons arrested for violent crime 2008 to 2019, 28.53% of them were black men. They're 6.6% of the population, 28.53% of all the arrestees for violent crime. If I could drill that down to young black men, less than 41 years of age, if I could, the disparity would become even more pronounced. You'd probably have a segment of the population, it's like 3% committing about a third of all that. Of homicides, I'm sure it would be about a third of homicides. For violent crime, it'd probably be 3% of the population committing a quarter of all the violent crime. Why is that? A lack of functional fathers in the home and crummy government schools that teach social justice rather than critical thinking, math, science, etc. This leads to dysfunctional black children, which leads to more fatherless black children, which leads to more high school dropouts, and leads to more crime. That's exactly why. Of the arrestees for murder / non-negligent manslaughter, and again, a little over 80% of the arrestees for murder and non-negligent manslaughter are men. When are the police going to quit? When are they going to quit picking on men and go after women? Of the arrestees for murder, 51.01% from 2008 to 2019, 51.01% of the arrestees were black. If we assume that 80% of the black arrestees for murder are black men, then that means a segment of the population that is only 6.6% of the entire U.S. population is responsible for 40.81% of the arrests for murder and non-negligent manslaughter. So the reason Winsome Sears, part of the reason she ended up so well, is her father had an active role in her life. And there's a lot of young black men that don't. And the Democrats exploit that with the welfare state, and they're totally happy with it, which is why they completely ignore the fact that in state after state after state, whether it's a high homicide state that Trump won, a low homicide state that Trump won, high homicide state that Biden or Hillary won, low homicide state that Biden or Hillary won, the counties where most of the homicide is occurring is in areas that are run by Democrats and have a lot of poor black people, because that's the way the Democrats want it. That's why all their cities, St. Louis, Kansas City, Detroit, Baltimore, Chicago, Newark, Camden, etc., on and on. Those cities are deteriorating and they're becoming a mess. So just a little food for thought there. Democrat, yeah, the new slave, the blacks were emancipated under Abraham Lincoln. Forget whether you liked Abraham Lincoln overall or not. They were emancipated under Abraham Lincoln, then the Civil Rights Act in 1964. But guess what? They're still slaves. They're slaves to the Democrat Party. Have a nice day. Don't thank me now, and vote these people out in November.